we begin from the beginning.
Oh, yes, of course.
Good to see your image.
Thank you so much.
But I'm glad that you asked me to relate some of the memories of mine in regard to Professor Durganand Sinha. And I'm glad to do that. It will be more or less informal, and perhaps some of it will be intensely personal.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I knew that, as we call him, Professor Durganand, I knew that he came from the family of a Raja. And he looked like one, very chubby and genial, and no worries in the world. What can worry a Raja? Because he didn't have prajas. So soon after he got his master's, as your record would show, he wasted no time but registered himself to do his master's degree with Professor Sir Frederick Bartlett. In those days, because I still remember that, because in my time in London, master's degree was thesis only. They took no courses. It was all research. And it was for 2 years. So to be with Professor Sir Bartlett was a unique opportunity for a young Indian man from Bihar. But he was following the footsteps of Professor Jamuna Prasad, who had followed Bartlett's work. And you would be teaching your undergraduate, I think if you remember teaching undergraduates once upon a time, that psychology was declared as a science in Britain long before we did so in India. Like my bachelor's degree was in philosophy, but I did my master's at Patna in psychology. Anyway, Cambridge, I know, you know, still, was highly scientifically oriented department. So it's no surprise that when Professor Sinha got back to India and joined the Patna University, it's no wonder that he carried out the scientific revolution in psychology. There was Krishna Kunj, I don't know if it still exists, away from the psychology department at Patna, on the bank of the Ganges, and I dreamed about that location because I was almost adjacent in the Mohendru hostel for PG students. And I was in the so-called merit wing. What an aspiration. So which houses only 10 kids facing Ganges. That was much more of a privilege than getting a first class first in BA honors in philosophy. And the person who influenced Professor Sinha very much, he's mentioned, he was Professor Mohsin. I think I have learned most from Professor Mohsin in my master's degree. He was an experimentalist. He warned me that when I graduate with a master's, not to write review papers, which is a hobby type of thing for psychology lecturers. For 5 years, he said, don't write a review paper. Do experimental papers. Anyway, from Krishna Kunj to Patna College to back to Revensa College as a lecturer, I have followed Professor Sinha's work very, very well. And personally, I will relate a few stories. He was surely a very generous person and appreciated the good things in life. When he came to Edmonton, one of his former students, Birendra Sinha, who was 2 years junior to me at Patna, served him dinner in Royal Dulton china and silver plate. He really appreciated that, and he mentioned it to me long time after. Now, the next memory, I think I should say, is my stay with his brother in Allahabad once, when I visited Allahabad for the bone ashes immersion ceremony in Prayag. So I was not expecting that his brother was employed. So what he did, his brother, like a king's son, he was practicing music. And that, for a clerk's son, which I was somewhat bewildering. How does one make a living by practicing music? And so the next meeting I remember afterwards was a journey to Professor Muhsin's house. That was such an iconic visit. Here we were, two of his students rather, in an auto rickshaw. You know, Professor Sinha takes more space than I do. We got off in Professor Muhsin's house and were invited for lunch. And to my amusement, I found that he has become a vegetarian. So rather than expecting kebabs, which he served for Professor Sinha, because I think by that time I had become a vegetarian too, he had took khichdi and some vegetables. So Professor Sinha and I enjoyed the visit very much. The next thing I remember, besides his visit to Edmonton, was or were so many visits to Bhubaneswar, and one of them during the International Cultural Psychology meeting in Bhubaneswar. Professor Sinha, with his wife, came to our house in Bhubaneswar. By that time, we have been living in Edmonton, but I was there with my wife. And we had a great discussion with his wife about the life of a newly married Raja's daughter-in-law who can never go back to her home because it's not just done, it's out of question. I was told, or she told us, that the only return journey was in a dolly when she dies and has to be cremated in the village. So Professor Sinha declared to my wife, warned that, look, my wife is really deaf. She can't hear anything. But she did hear everything. I think she was a lip reader, partly. And we really enjoyed that visit because he gave us a personal history of the changes in the country over the many years they have been married by then. But in any case, the other thing that I must mention is his leadership. There's a lot written about his leadership and erudition and books and all of that. But for me, the most outstanding contribution he made was to turn junior colleagues to be famous. And one of them is Professor R.C. Tripathi. It is not usually found among Indian heads of department because they perceive their upcoming competitors as enemies. So they want to really block their progress. But Professor Sinha, following the old Hindu precept, allowed his juniors to even surpass him in many ways. I think that is how leaders should function. And I wish more leaders like him become heads of departments or heads of institutions where you allow the juniors not to follow you, but as Tagore said, to blossom in their own step. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think you made some very, very significant points, Professor Das. But I think one of the points which you made, which related to his leadership qualities, I completely endorse that, because one of the things which he did was that if he met people outside the department, he talked not about himself, but only about his colleagues. And that's a quality which is generally not seen or observed in people who come from the kind of background which Professor Sinha did, which was totally feudal, as you mentioned. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Lovely word. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
I'm not too old. Didn't ramble, did I?
No. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.